Okay, I had someone ask me recently about actually a very good observation about phase, and I wanted to answer that because I've been showing everybody that what I like to do is I like to find the first zero crossing point, say about here, and then I like to match this up. Let's zoom out here and expand these. I like to match these up and match the next zero crossing point. Then I would look at these and I would say, hey, this is out of phase. And I would say, all right, let's process and let's reverse, phase flip and invert the phase here. And then next thing you know, nice. This is looking pretty in phase. When we go to this zero crossing, it's at that zero crossing. They're the same pitch. So more or less, they are doing the same thing in phase the way we'd like them to. I can make these a little bigger so it's easier to exemplify. So maybe the actual zero crossings here. And we can also do this. Let me Control Z back to where we started. We can also do this by putting, as you often see me do, auto align on our overheads here. In this case, it's a stereo overhead. So maybe the first thing I'll do is I will grab this. I'm going to break these into mono because I think we'll get a better result. Even though that these are in phase with each other, more or less, I think we get the best result when we phase match mono source to mono source. So I'm going to go up here to Project, Convert Tracks, Multi-Channel to Mono. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two mono tracks. We're going to delete our stereo print and make sure our routing is correct on our overhead prints here. Everything's going to stereo out. Great. So now I have just the left overhead. Great. And just the snare top, which is awesome. And we are going to, there we go. I thought we were losing some attack. We're going to do what we would usually do, which is put auto align as a send from our left overhead, and then auto align to a receive on our top snare. We're going to look at our peaks. Great. Set our thresholds, delay and polarity. By doing the delay, that's going to do the shift, and having delay and polarity, that's going to do the polarity is going to do the flip. And so this isn't a ton of data, but it should be enough to get us to where we're going. Okay, great. So 151. Now, that basically means that we moved this track 151 samples, I believe, to, I'm sorry, the snare top, we moved 151 samples positively. We are going to move that right to match this. So let's prove that. Right click, render in place, render settings, no tail. Okay, now let's render that track. And voila, you can see that the phase has been flipped. Our zero crossings are super on point. Yep, that looks awesome. And of course, as the amplitude dies down, things may not be perfectly in phase on the back side, but still pretty close. And we kind of get into the land of diminishing returns here. This first chunk, though, is really, really important for us. So let's hear that and confirm. And let's do a little level matching while we're at it. Mix console. Cool. Great. Okay, so that's in phase. Now, what someone noticed was that, hey, I looked at your sample library and I printed things, and they said your sample library isn't reflecting what you've been teaching, and that's true. So Dave, my partner in the sample library, did all of the phase stuff. I was the artist generating the sounds and that type of stuff and making sure that was good. And then my partner helped me program it into the Kontakt player. So when Dave did this, he took an alternate but also okay method. And that is to say that we are still at our zero crossings. This is just how it came out of the library. At our zero crossings, we are shifting more or less at the same moments. And this particular early moment is still shifting. That one's good. That one's good. And this one's going up when this one's going up, but this one's late. Now, what's the difference? Like, why is that okay to do? Well, the number one thing with phase is we don't want to give inverse instructions to our speaker. So here we go with MS Paint again. Sorry, everybody. So here's our speaker, right? And here's our speaker cone, right? And then so when we send drum information to the speaker, we've got a big sharp transient here. The big thing is we want all of the information to be pointed in the same direction at the same time, so that when we're telling our speaker to move, we're telling it to move in the same direction all at once. Well, when we have a delayed, so let's say this is top snare, boom, whatever, these are our peaks, something like that. Well, you can, and it actually does create more of a 3D effect. You can, as your overheads naturally are, delay your overheads and your room mics so that they are the same pitch, so they have a very similar wave length. But if they're delayed one whole phrase, if you will, or one whole cycle is a better way to put that, you can say, hey, just snare top for that very first moment, and then the very first moment I overheads is going to catch the very second moment of my snare top. So you are still sending all positive, cohesive instruction sets to the speaker, but you're doing it with a slight delay. Now, why would you want to do that? We definitely don't have to say that. Why would you want to do that? Well, a lot of people think that by doing that, you create a more three-dimensional space. It's almost like a tiny, tiny slapback delay. You aren't really doing any harm, as you can see. Like here, we're still catching plenty of zero crossings that look pretty good in the back end, even though as it's hitting the overheads and stuff, the waveform itself is modulating and shifting because it's now starting to catch reflections. But you are it's a different effect, but it is still definitely in phase. So you could almost call this like an advanced phase thing. So far I've been teaching, very traditional line your first zero crossing with your first zero crossing. Make sure your wavelengths are the same in terms of length, or your wavelength is the same. And when we get into using, let's say, a sample that is a different pitch from our original sample, then we have to look at that stuff and make sure we don't have wavelength confliction. But I just wanted to dive in and answer this question very thoroughly. And so those are both totally appropriate ways to use phase with slightly different effects. Obviously Dave from Room Sound decided that he wanted to go this way with it, which is totally cool, totally appropriate. And I usually in my own productions will go with the first zero crossing. But either way, totally works as long as you don't see this. You don't want to see, where is it? Process. And invert phase. You don't want to ever see that, right? That's going to be no bueno. Super thin, way better. So hopefully that explains a lot of things and explains why what we're doing, why we want that single instruction set to be simple when it gets sent to the speaker.